Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is November 3rd, 2024, and let's get to the news and map updates happening in Ukraine, shall we? So today I want to focus on, again, the situation in Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk region, because it's very difficult to say the very least for the Ukrainians. And the Russians, of course, continue with their small tactical gains day by day in this sector. And also talk about what we can expect in the next few weeks in this area, and what is going to be happening in 2025 as well. So first of all, you guys can see that really the main thrust right now for the Russians after taking Solidove, a little bit north of Kurakhove, is now an offensive towards Kurakhove. So the Russians took two key areas, Solidove around here, and also they took Vuhledar a few weeks ago. So you can see that now they're pushing from the north of Kurakhove and from the south of Kurakhove, and also directly. So I don't anticipate the Ukrainians to be holding Kurakhove for much longer, unfortunately, and probably by the end of this month, the Ukrainians will retreat out of Kurakhove. It's just, to me, it's evident at this stage. Kurakhove served its purpose. It inflicted huge casualties. The Ukrainian defenders here were inflicting huge casualties for the last few years. I shared a lot of stories and images with you guys with the destruction of large Russian assaults and armored convoys here. It's been just a disaster for the Russians, but unfortunately, as we see, the Russians do have a very large manpower advantage, which allows them to just waste human lives, and for them, it's worth it. So anticipate Kurakhove being taken by the Russians, and they will probably take this area here. Now, the silver lining behind this is that winter is coming, and I've said this a few times in the past, but with winter coming, it means that there will be a drastic reduction of Russian assaults. We understand that with winter, there is cold weather, of course. Roads are far more difficult to traverse, and the Russians recently have, in the last few months, they've been changing their tactics. After the capture of Avdiivka, we've been seeing the Russians utilizing more mobile units, meaning that they're using dirt bikes, Chinese desert cross kind of golf carts, ATVs, small-wheeled 4x4 vehicles, even loaf vans, the little Soviet vans that they have. And they've started utilizing these mobile tactics because they can flank easily the Ukrainian positions, right? And we've been seeing this tactic being used multiple times, whether it be around Vuhledar, where the Russians flanked again from the west and from the east, and then eventually they create a pocket, forcing the Ukrainians to retreat back. So with these mobile tactics that the Russians are using, it only works when roads are easily accessible and it's easy to traverse them. With winter, there is snow, there is muddy weather as well, and muddy roads, and they will not be effective anymore. They can't be driving those scooters and those ATVs through farm fields. They're frozen or full of snow or muddy as hell. And also with cold weather means that you need to bring more supplies with you. And seeing how the Russians stack like 12 men on top of a, BMP or even more, they're going to have way more supplies, meaning that there's going to be a reduction of men that they can carry on top of these vehicles that they're bringing to assault Ukrainian positions. So that means that there's going to be definitely a reduction of assaults, and the Ukrainians, I believe, will be able to stabilize the situation by the winter of 2025. But it will get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. So we need to be anticipating that the Russians will have some other tactical gains in the next few weeks, specifically around Kurakhove. This is where they're focusing on. Thankfully, in the north of Pokrovsk, around New York and Toretsk, the Ukrainians are holding the line more or less for now. So that's good news that it's really only this area right now that is really problematic for the Ukrainians. Additionally, we understand that the Russians will go for the offensive towards Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is a very large city. I do have confidence that the Ukrainians had enough time to build some defenses, some fortifications in the last few months, and it's not going to be a walk in the park for the Russians. This is going to be another black hole of the likes of Bakhmut, even Mariupol. Like, the Russians will expand and utilize a lot of men, and that's going to bring huge catastrophic losses for them again. We remember that for the Battle of Bakhmut, the ratio of losses for the Russians was like 5 or even 7-1. And this is what Ukraine is betting on, is just trying to inflict maximum amount of casualties on the Russian military, because that's the only way Ukraine can win. Ukraine has a smaller population, less resources, and it cannot go on defensive right now. It's just suicide for the Ukrainians. So that's the silver lining, is that I do have hope and optimism that the Ukrainians will be able to stabilize the situation around Donbas. And truthfully with you guys, Ukraine doesn't have a choice, right? Do you really expect the Russians to be acting in good faith, even if there's a negotiation and some sort of deal that is brokered with Russia because Ukraine is desperate for peace? Like, Russia is not going to stop right now. And so Ukraine doesn't have the choice but to continue fighting. So everybody thinking, oh, in the next few weeks, Russia's going to have a breakthrough. You're wrong, because Ukraine has men everywhere as well, just as much as Russia has men everywhere on the front line. So there's not going to be any breakthroughs, but there will be small tactical gains for the Russians. So that's something that we need to understand here. And furthermore, I think Russia is really pushing hard because they also know that essentially there is the US elections that is going to be happening in the next few days. Putin is betting heavily on a Trump victory. I think that he's trying to pretend that he doesn't really care about the outcome of the US elections, but we need to understand that Trump is probably best case scenario for Putin. If Trump wins, then it's going to be even more trouble for the Ukrainians, because we know that Trump has been saying some pretty sad stuff about, you know, his relationship with Putin, how he even admires Putin in certain situations. Like, it's really a big bet as to what his policy for Ukraine will be. And I think that I'd rather be pessimistic than optimistic for Trump. With Kamala Harris, we can expect more or less of the same, meaning that being that she's the vice president of the current Biden administration, she will likely continue to pursue kind of a de-escalation management policy. And I'd rather also be pessimistic and not tell lies that, oh, she's going to come into power and then she's going to open the floodgates and give all the weapons and all the permissions that Ukraine needs to defeat Russia on Russian territory, right? By launching missile attacks and having tomahawks and having permission to use ATACMS. Like, I'd rather not bet on that, because I know that if there's one thing I learned in the last 3 years in analyzing and discussing this conflict, this war with you guys, is that the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so I think that Kamala Harris is more predictable, whereas Trump is completely unpredictable. And so Putin right now is just doing everything possible to gain more territory, so he has the upper hand, and he feels like he has the momentum with US elections. He's certainly is meddling in these elections by creating a bunch of groups, propaganda groups on Facebook and social media to divide the American people, right? One of the main themes here, again, is division in the United States, which is problematic because Putin really wants some sort of civil unrest, a civil war in the United States, so he can take off the focus on Ukraine again. The same way like what we saw happen last year in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza. This is Putin's dream. So we really need to look at the global geopolitical situation right now. And this is why Putin is just doing everything possible to push in Donbas and make it look like the Russian army is strong and they're winning. And look at us, we have North Korea on our side now. Like, trust me when I say this, I think that Russia is doing this because they're becoming weaker and weaker by the day. And one thing we can, why I'm saying this, is their economy is being crippled. And in 2025, it will be absolutely destroyed. I've given you guys multiple examples in my previous video. Just a few days ago, the Russian central bank increased interest rates to 21%. Huge, right? And you know that the prime rate is actually not 21%, probably 25 or 30%. Somebody that's taking a mortgage, a car loan, a business loan is not taking it at 21. They're taking a much higher interest rate. Bonds are collapsing. The very fact that price of staple foods like butter, potatoes, carrots has increased every single month by like just the inflation has been increasing by 9%, but the price of butter, I read this today, in Russia has increased by 25% in a year. That's huge, right? And it's not like the Russians have huge wages, right? Their standard of living was already terrible prior to the war. Now it's just become unbearable. And I think at 2025 will really cripple the Russian economy. And their society will slowly start disintegrating, and there's going to be a lot of unrest within Russia. And we need to also take that into account, that Russia is not doing well on every single facet. It's an illusion. And so Ukraine needs to be holding the line, needs to continue fighting, because I think that collapse can happen very soon. I could be wrong. There's a lot of dynamics that could change, and a lot of variables that could change in the next few months. So I really just hope that we're going to go in the right direction, and the West, the democratic free world, will start taking the right decisions in 2025. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my little update about the situation in Pokrovsk. It's not easy, but I do have a lot of optimism, and there's a lot of good things that are going for Ukraine. But we need to start and continue, not start, but continue ramping up our support for the Ukraine military. That means donations to the Ukrainian drone program. And I will leave a link below to the Sternenko Rusori's drone fund, where you can leave a few dollars if you want to continue funding the build and construction of FPV drones and various types of other drones as well. And one last thing I want to mention as well is that Ukraine, one thing that also makes me very optimistic is that Ukraine will soon have long-range capabilities of their own. Grim 2, I've talked about in the last few months. It's a very long program that Ukraine has been building. It's been scrapped, it's been forgotten, but recently the Ukrainian government understood how important it is to build its own long-range missiles and ballistics, and Grim 2 is a Ukrainian-made ballistic missile that has, I believe, about 500 to 700 kilometer range that Zelensky mentioned that they successfully tested, and they're now in production of these Grim 2s. Likely that Ukraine is stockpiling some of them because they're anticipating a very difficult winter ahead, as the Russians will certainly not shy away from hitting infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and other civilian apartments in other cities in Ukraine. Like, they've been doing this for the last 3 years. We know what to expect. And so Ukraine needs to have an answer of their own. So I think that Ukraine also will soon have more long-range capabilities, and they can decide what they want to do because it's Ukraine's weapons. It's not weapons from the United States. Ukraine doesn't need to ask for permission. So I'm hoping that in the next few months, we will be seeing them in action and destroying Russian production facilities of missiles, ammunition, arsenals, military bases. And we'll see when we'll see these important facilities blowing up in Russia. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my update, and I'll see you in the next one. Slava Ukraini!